Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources that we hope will help improve your life. I'm Stu Reid. Here's my co-host, Dave Burstein. Hey, Dave.
Hello.
What's going on, Dave? I understand there's been a breakthrough on an issue dealing with the new treatments for sickle cell, which we've talked about a number of times on the show. What's the latest?
There are actually two genetic treatments for sickle cell that look to be working remarkably well. Uh, there, there are two problems. One, the treatment is really intense. It can involve 2 months in the hospital as your immune system is knocked out so the treatment can work. And it's going to be prohibitively expensive, at least if you're paying the regular price. They're talking about $1.5 million or something like that. The good news is that for 200 million Americans, it's going to be mostly covered by insurance. There are two treatments, as I said, one of which is coming from Bluebird Bio and is called Lifirgenia. And the data there is remarkable. Severe sickle cell events were eliminated for 94%, and all events were eliminated for 88% in about a year of follow-up. A year
Wow.
of follow-up is not a lot. Normally, drugs don't get out there until much, much more testing,
Mhm.
but these results are so important, they put it out.
Now,
Now,
David, are these the gene editing procedures that we talked about previously on the
it's
show?
a, it's a it's a different kind of gene editing,
Hmm.
but it's still gene editing. What's going on in both, I believe, is that they discovered years ago that when you're an infant, the fetal hemoglobin
Hmm.
is fine. What happens is the fetal hemoglobin pretty much disappears from your system early, and the hemoglobin that is left, hemoglobin being how you carry oxygen through the blood, uh, has looks like a sickle cell, which is where the name came from, and has a major problem that causes sickle cell anemia. The solution, people had thought for many years, was to regrow or bring back the fetal hemoglobin. And that's exactly what this stuff does. It's got a long way to go before it's a good treatment, but a treatment that works is worth a great deal.
Hmm.
The way US healthcare works for many people is through the insurance companies. Almost all corporate plans and most of the Medicare plans and Medicaid plans, the Advantage plans, work through private or sometimes nonprofit company, and they negotiate with the drug makers and the hospitals for prices. What's happened here is that most of those companies, enough covering 200 million Americans, have cut a deal with one drug company to get the sickle cell treatment at a price they're willing to pay, and hence people are covered for it.
That's astounding, Dave. That's kind of I don't has that ever happened before? And I mean, for the insurance companies and the pharmaceuticals to get together like this and to come up with, I guess it's still profit driven, but still, it's pretty astounding that they have come together and figured this out.
That's actually the way the system is designed to work. What
Hmm.
happened years ago is a lot of people in policy realized that it was impractical to get government negotiating lower prices. So they worked around it by setting up the private companies, which are always negotiating, as an intermediary. It's very expensive. The private companies take off the top billions and billions of dollars, but it works for some things. What's new, besides that it's going for sickle cell, in the last 2 or 3 years, they've put a program to deal with some of the ridiculously expensive treatments out there. $500,000 and even $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
What they've compromised on is still going to be very, very expensive to ultimately pay for. But the drug companies agreed to not charge the insurance companies if it doesn't work,
Mm.
so that the insurance companies get a discount on the ones where it doesn't work. In this case, that's about 10%, which is very low. Other treatments are not nearly as effective at other things. And they're going along with it.
Mhm. Well, I have
There's
a question, Dave. Break this down, man. I'm a little confused. You say that the coverage is 200 million people. Now, is this for conditions in addition to sickle cell? I mean, I don't think they're anywhere near that number of folks with sickle
this
cell
is
in the U.S.
I'm sorry, I'm not clear. What's happening is that different people have different insurance. The insurance for 200 million people will cover sickle cell if you have serious disease for those who have it.
Mm-hmm.
Another 130 million or so are not going to be covered by insurance, at least so far. This has always been a hard question when you get major expensive uh, medical treatments. The classic one was when kidney dialysis came out a number of years ago. And there were things like a TV show on deciding who shall live and who shall die,
Mm-hmm.
who would get the kidney treatment paid for and who wouldn't, because it was too expensive for the vast bulk of people to pay. That resulted in Congress setting up a special program to pay for treatment because they couldn't face the fact that people were going to die just because they wouldn't pay what the drug company, or well, what the treatment cost.
Mm-hmm.
That needed facilities more than drugs, as I recall. Uh, and this has been a long debate. In many states now, people are dying because Medicaid, which covers people who don't have insurance and are poor, does not pay for treatments that might save their life. A lot of expensive cancer treatments are not covered in some states. Luckily, here in New York State, partly because of an old friend of mine called Dick Gottfried, who spent his entire career in the New York State Assembly, coverage is pretty good. But that's not true across the country. Here on sickle cell, it's getting coverage for about 2/3 of the country so far. And 1/3 are going to have to fight very hard if they want to get treated. Now, let me go back to what I said at the beginning. This treatment is hard. It's not just expensive, but it's hard. You could die from the treatment, and people do because they have to knock out the immune system for it to work.
Mm-hmm.
And at least in some of it, people spend 2 months in the hospital because with their immune system in trouble, they can go into crisis anytime and do.
Right.
So, yes, if you have sickle cell, you have a hard choice to make right now, whether you want to go in for the difficult and dangerous treatment or continue to put up with what is often a terrible disease. Can't can't be controlled even with the most powerful narcotics that we have. Or wait, because there's a lot of research happening for other kinds of treatment that may be less toxic. So make your decision, make it intelligently with a good doctor, and hopefully there's a way to pay for the treatment because most of us couldn't possibly afford what it's costing. And yes, the whole system is intolerable, unacceptable, immoral, and the way things work in the United States for now. And obviously, both of us and most people we respect want to get major changes there. But in the current system, that's how it's going to work. And the good news is that many people will have the choice. Let's go back to more ordinary news. This was the kind of thing that's life shaking for some people, so I wanted to put it at the top. There's lots more happening. Stu, what's your first story?
Well,
Oh,
I ran across.
poverty.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Before we go to stories, Stu, I hear you're giving a speech.
Well, that might be overstating what it is. It's going to be a discussion coming up next month, February 13th at 6:30. We're going to have a Zoom conversation sponsored by the Internet Society, the New York chapter, of which both you and I happen to be members. And we're going to be talking about community technology and some of the things that myself and my business partner, Doug Frazier, have been doing with community broadband services and applications here in New York City. So we're going to be talking about community networks and what works, what we've seen work, what doesn't work. And also might be some mention of the ACP program, the Affordable Connectivity Program, which we're going to talk about, you and I, in more depth next week on this show. But yeah, the 13th, February 13th, that's a Tuesday at 6:30. And we'll be making further announcements on this show about how folks can tune in and become a part of the conversation.
Now, one of Stu's great features, or maybe disadvantages, is he doesn't like to promote himself. So let me speak up. I first met Stu and Doug 25 years ago when they were building community networks in the South Bronx, one of the poorest parts of it was one of the poorest parts of the northern half of the United States. They're still at it. There's probably no one in the country who has much experience. Other people jump into the newspapers, jump into Washington, are all over the promotion of this kind of stuff. Stu and Doug have been out there actually doing it, and that's why they're the ones to listen to and learn from. And I'm proud to know them. Let's get on with the news.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, Dave. I appreciate that. Uh, this is kind of a soft story, but it really interested me. Being a person who loves music, who loves media, story about a company called the Archive of Contemporary Music, or ARCM. And they are the holders of about 3 million records, long playing vinyl records. This is a company that was started, it's a nonprofit. They were started back in, I believe, the 1980s by a music producer and collector by the name of B. George. Not familiar with him, but maybe some of our listeners are. He was a record collector and an author, and he bequeathed his 47,000 disc collection to Seed ARC back in the mid 80s. And right now they have to move. They've been in a space upstate New York, and they've got to move for various reasons. And they're looking for donations to help secure a new space for the archives. B. George kind of equated it to the beginning of the Smithsonian Institute, where a guy by the name of James Smithson, I wasn't familiar with his name, you may have been, Dave. Dave Smithson donated the equivalent of $500,000 in gold sovereigns to found the Smithsonian. Anyway, this group is looking for that kind of donation. Now, what intrigued me in particular, Dave, was these guys are using analog. They're collecting and archiving analog recordings of media. And one of the statements that the author of the article said is that so many of our cultural archives are now residing on server farms. From Netflix to Hulu to Max to HBO, all of these places, Pandora, all these places where the music sits on a digital capability, and it's getting harder and harder to be able to actually collect and warehouse analog copies of all the books, all the music, all the movies. There's so much stuff out there. But one of the issues is, and we've talked about this on the show before, a couple of things. One, you don't know what's going to be available on the streaming service and what's not. It's really up to the streaming service owners or curators as to what's going to be available and what's not going to be available. And I used to always have this conversation with my brother, who's now gone, but he was an avid, maniacal DVD collector, Dave. He just had every movie that imaginable that he was interested in on DVD. And I used to say to him, Tone, all this stuff is available online. Why do you have to have these hundreds and hundreds, maybe even 1,000 DVDs stacked up in your home? And he said, well, a couple of things. One, you don't know what's going to be available online and when it's not, when Netflix is going to pull something, when it's going to be there. Secondly, you got to pay for those streaming services. And thirdly,
You don't. There's whole
really,
lots of people who have found an alternative
okay,
to the
but that you got to be
get
creative to
what
get
they
around.
can't pay for.
They are commercial services. Most of them are not free. Yes, they're creative ways to get around paying, but they're commercial services.
Yep.
And finally, you got to have a working, robust internet connection. Suppose that goes down, then what are you going to do? Suppose your electricity goes down. All you have is your little generator. What are you going to do? This is what my brother used to tell me. I got my DVDs. I got all the movies I need right here. I don't need any connection. I don't need anybody to provide it to me for me. I got it right here. One of the advantages of having your own physical media. The other thing, Dave, I just want I'm not don't want to cut you off. I know you want to chime in. But the other thing, and this is something that we talked about probably 4 or 5 years ago when we had a digital archivist on the show, and we were talking about the fact that digital archives are not necessarily forever. You think of a digital copy being lasting forever, not necessarily. You have digital media where the formats change. You have digital media where it degrades over time. And, I'm sure you and I have copies of digital media that we don't even have a player for anymore. I'm thinking of zip drives in particular, where I got tons of photos and videos on zip drives. I don't even know if I can find my zip drive player anymore. So, I mean, these are some of the issues with having digital media as opposed to hard analog media. And I was just really excited to hear about this company, Archive Contemporary Music, and the fact that they exist, first of all, and have some 3 million LPs in their collection and counting. And I just think it's really important to keep these actual physical copies of media. And just one other footnote noted by this guy, B. George, who is the founder and curator. And he noted that there's so many different versions, Dave, of different songs and different. He used an example, John Coltrane's "My Love Supreme," and how there are different versions, and how the metadata on the digital version does not necessarily tell you where it came from, not necessarily accurate as to which copy, which version it is. And corollary, and this is something that I really miss with the digital music, is you don't have all of the stuff that went with it, the ephemeral material, if you will, the books, the catalogs that often were packaged with the record set, the photographs, and the pictures and the artwork. When I hear certain music, I can visualize the album cover from back in my youth. And today, with the digital music, there you don't have that visualization. You don't have the pictures. You don't have the visual history of You don't see all of the artists as you did back in the day when there were albums and you open up the album and there are photos of all the people in the group, etc. So that's something that I, from a personal basis, I miss that, and I'm just happy to see this group, ARC, that they exist and that they're working to preserve, the analog history of music and video. Well,
I
what do you think about it? I mean, you're from the same era that I am, Dave. Do you feel any of the any of the pangs of love for what this venture is doing that I do?
well, I almost always read books digitally these days.
Hmm.
It's easier. I don't have to put glasses on because the Kindle I have can just give me larger type.
Hmm.
And Jenny hates having so many books around like I used to. So I've let a lot of them go. But even though I almost never will use a physical book, I've got two big bookcases of things that I won't give up.
Hmm.
Now, it turns out I have almost everything there digitally or know where to get it, but I don't want to give it up. It's not a matter of whether it's digital or analog so much about whether it's physical or could disappear.
Hmm.
What your brother had was actually digital video disc, but he had the actual disc.
Right.
So he had it. Digital stuff can be a problem. Vint Cerf has been crusading for a decade or more to find some way to preserve all this stuff because, as you say, it could be on a zip drive that you can't play, and almost nobody plays, and could be nowhere will there be a place to play. That's not just digital or analog. I have some videotapes we made of my mother in her last days on VHS cassettes. I don't have a VHS player.
Yeah, tell me about it. Tell me. I go back even further, Dave. I have videos on half-inch reel to reel when home video did not even exist. And I've got to spend hundreds of dollars to get each one converted. I had a TV show, cable TV show back in the 70s, and went around recording this stuff on half-inch video when there was no VHS. There was no Sony, whatever their format was. There was none of that. There was no home video. And so you're right. I mean, what do you do with this stuff? How do you access it?
And we have a horrible example of what can go wrong. Books tend to survive. There's 1,000 or more books from before 1500. They call them incunabula in
Hmm.
libraries around the world.
Hmm.
But we have lost most, at least two-thirds, of all the movies from the silent era
Hmm.
before 1927.
Hmm.
Some of them were classics, but that film stock was hard to keep safe. Some of it literally burned up,
Hmm.
others degraded. And now many of the first great films do not exist in any form.
Hmm.
And on that, everybody not everybody in Hollywood, but people like Marty Scorsese and George Lucas have been finding funds to copy and preserve the few that we have left.
Yeah. Hmm.
And this is why this matters.
Yeah.
Libraries are sometimes invaluable. And you're right, a Lo Supreme, you want to be able to hear all the different things he improvised because
Mm.
he did improvise different things every time he recorded it. And it's a genius piece of recording. But
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
most of our audience has heard it at some point. It's
And
unforgettable.
and the other point, Dave, just we're talking about the different media, analog, digital, LPs. I have LPs right now that play fine, a little scratchy, but they play fine, that are 60 and 70 years old. I don't have one CD that's older than about 10, 15 years that plays. And most of the old ones skip. When they first came out, they marketed the CD. Oh, indestructible, last a lifetime. Not. I have many LPs much, much older than my CD collection, and they play just fine. And also, one of the points, again, just to go back to the story by B. George and the ARC, he talked about a little bit jokingly, but said if you just have a needle and some string and a bicycle to rotate, you can actually get some sound out of an LP with a very simple, basic material that will and can be around for decades, if not centuries, going forward. Not so with digital media. So I mean, just the LP itself, the long playing record, what LP stands for some of the young folks out there that may not know.
They don't even, young folks often don't even know what a record looks like.
Yeah, but
Although,
but the rapper guys, they do the scratching thing, so they know, the records kind of came back a little bit with that group, Dave, and they're releasing singles on the big, I forget what they call the big, it's like 12, 16-inch LPs where you have just one song. Some of the new musicians are doing that. So there is some familiarity with some of the young folks, but you're right. In general, LP. What's an LP? What are you talking about? Yeah,
yeah, and the covers, especially for the jazz albums, and occasionally for things like the Beatles and the Stones,
yeah, sure.
are remarkable pieces of art that you really miss. But we
Yeah,
have to take a break, don't we?
yes, we do. We're about halfway through our show, so let's remind our listeners that you're listening to Community and Technology on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem, with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid. We'll be right back after a brief musical break.
I don't know where my man is. Where can he be? What is he doing? I've been asking questions all over town. Where is he? Where can he be? Hoping he can be found. I'm on the loose and I don't dig it. Take my advice. If you find a man, girl, on tight. Don't let him. If you want him, don't let him. Hold on, hold on. To him tight. I don't know where my man is. Where can he be? What is he doing? I've been looking, I've been searching, I've been asking questions all over town. Where is he? Where can he be? Hoping he can be found. I'm on the loose and I don't dig it. Take my advice. If you find it, you find it, you find it, you find it, you find a man. Hold on to him tight. Don't let him, don't let him. If you want him, hold on to him tight. But if you don't want him, just let him go. Let him go. Let him go. Hold on tight. Don't let him go. Don't let him go. If you want him, don't let him go. If you want him, don't let him go. Don't let him go. Don't let him go. Don't let him go.
Okay, we're back. Community Technology, Dave Burstein and Stu Reid on WHCR 90.3 FM. Dave, we haven't talked about it in a couple of weeks, but I know you had some insights. We were talking during the break, comparing the evolution of the internet. You and I were around in its early days with the evolution of AI, and you were pointing out some possible comparisons. What's your latest thinking?
Well, I'm 72 years old. That doesn't make me smarter. In fact, sometimes I'm feeling I'm losing it a little bit, but I seem pretty potent. But it does means I know a whole lot of things. So the last year I've been doing a whole lot in AI, and it's become obvious two things. One, there are incredible, almost unbelievably powerful things happening. And two, the hype is even more than the reality.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a boom. There's a lot of excitement and a lot of money on things that are going to fail. I can see that because I was in the middle of the internet boom of 23 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing broadband when it was the first thing happening, and the sky was the limit. And then suddenly it all came and crashed.
What was that day? Some of our viewers may not remember that, but what that was around the year 2000 or so. What briefly just kind of summarize that crash, if you will.
There had been an incredible boom. Companies and ideas that had very little behind them were suddenly enormously valuable.
Mm-hmm.
I remember Covad, a company that was doing DSL connections, broadband. Within the first year, it was worth $10 billion on almost no revenue and no profit.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly,
and wasn't that also the time when AOL was able to buy Time Warner for, I think, just stock, which was incredible. Time Warner, a huge media company.
Actually, it was the other way around as they organized it. That Time Warner gave almost the entire value of the combined company to the stockholders of AOL.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was thought to be so important and so valuable, that was the way to get it. Well, suddenly in 2000, people realized the internet values just were wildly inflated. And it fell apart as extreme as the Depression in 1929.
Mm-hmm.
So Time Warner managed to survive because it had some real assets and it had paid in stock, but the stock value went down. I don't know the number, but it was probably over 90%.
Mm-hmm.
And as I say, COVID went from up to $10 billion in almost no time, and to bankruptcy a few years later.
Wow.
And this was it's called tulip bulbs in financial writing because this happened many hundreds of years ago to the tulip bulbs in Holland.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
Everybody thought at the time the tulip bulbs would always go up in value. So they did go up in value because people bought them because they were always going to go up in value. And at some point, that bubble burst. And there was a bubble in the stock in the South Sea Company, and there was a bubble in stocks in the 1920s that fell apart in the Depression.
Mm-hmm.
So investors are not rational. We saw it in housing in the United States
Sure did.
15 years ago. That when people think something is going to go up in value, they buy into it. And they're buying into it, pushes up in value more. And other people get excited and they buy into it. And the price goes up and up and up, far beyond the real value of something. And at some point can come crashing down. And it did in the housing bubble. And it's going to happen. 80 or 90% of the companies that people think are enormously valuable and investing their life savings in AI are going to fail. So wonderful things are going to happen in AI, but be very, very careful what you're investing in. It's been happening in cryptocurrency for the last while as well. Bitcoin is holding its own, but others that were valued into the billions and tens of billions of dollars have fallen to almost nothing. In fact, fallen to actually nothing, because it was all hype and all boom, the values went up, so people were sure it was a great investment. They invested and the prices went up and up and up, and eventually the bubble burst. And I've learned about it because I've been around so long that I've seen it happen time and again. So investing doesn't work as easily as people think.
So, Dave, do you see this happening in the AI space right now? There's billions of dollars being poured into various AI companies. Some, I
No,
guess.
it's not billions of dollars. It's hundreds of billions of dollars and maybe
Okay.
into the trillions.
Okay.
And some of them are going to do really well, and some of them are going to change the world, but most of them won't. And there's already one very exciting company. It's called Stability AI, and they have one of the two best image generators on the planet. It can make pictures that you're sure were a photograph, and it just from the words you tell it. And they do it better, for example, than OpenAI's DALL-E 3. Midjourney and Stability are even better than the
So
stuff.
you're predicting that this company, Stability, is gonna be one
No,
of
I'm
the
not going to
survivors.
predict anything of the sort. I will say that its largest investor has wanted to fire the president and sell the company for whatever they can get for it, because he sees that it's not going to make any. He believes it's not going to make any money. The company's fighting it, and they've done great work, but
Interesting.
it may not be a good investment. And the lead investor has decided
He wants
it's
to
going to
cash
fall
out.
apart.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So
There was a big
that's going to
shakeout.
happen to a lot of folks.
So you're expecting, you're predicting a big shakeout. Yeah. I mean, is it safe to say you're making that prediction too?
I made that prediction a while back because I could see it a while back because I've lived through it before. And at the moment, I have in front of me an article from Wired today about how somebody who's prominent in the field thinks that's happening. And in the last month, it's been going around in the industry and in the press that there's a bubble there. It's going to burst, and be very careful. But the way I started saying this is that because I have that experience, I'm not smarter than many of the geniuses who are putting things together, but I've learned a few things. Like there are bubbles, they do burst, and it's very hard for most people in the middle of it to realize that just because it's wonderful, just because the price is going up, doesn't mean it's going to go up forever. That's against the laws of physics or laws of financial reality. So
I mean, the laws of how people behave, that's for sure.
Yeah. And it happens again and again in the stock market. And there have been books and books written about how it happens, but it keeps happening again because people don't get it. I remember that, well, before the housing burst in 2008, I was hearing from people for 15 years talk about how the best investment you could ever make is housing.
Yeah, sure.
Buy your home.
You heard about that for much longer than that, Dave. That was an axiom. The value of housing and real estate will never go down. That was just like seemed to be a natural law of some sort.
It's certainly, and that's the way a lot of people felt about it. It wasn't my expertise, but I could see that coming. And I remember having the conversation with Jenny, whose father was saying she has to buy a house because that's the best investment. Well, I remember back around 1980 or so, a friend of mine who didn't have much money, was working and wanted to go to medical school, put everything she had and could borrow into buying a co-op apartment on 96th Street because everybody knew real estate only goes up in value.
Right.
And the bubble burst on that then. And suddenly she was broke.
Mm.
And it turned out to be a very desperate time for her.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, there are great things happening in artificial intelligence. Yes, people have made billions on bitcoins, but I've also seen people being totally wiped out, including on most of the cryptocurrency lately.
Mm-hmm.
So even if I can't tell you whether Bitcoin's going to go up or down in price next month or even 10 years from now. But I can tell you that there's enormous risk there, and don't put any money into it that you can't afford to lose. It's just the human nature. We we tend to have overconfidence,
Mm-hmm.
and we tend to believe in what we believe. It turns out who are some of the worst problems are people who get things totally wrong. And the smarter you are, the more likely you are to believe in what you see
Yeah.
and have it disappear.
Confirmation bias. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've seen that in a friend of mine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can put the name out there. He knows this is true. John Chaffee basically invented DSL. He's called the father of DSL. He's a Stanford professor, electronic engineer, absolutely brilliant. And was very. Everybody told him what he thought he could do was totally impossible until he went and did it.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody who's using DSL is using his DMT work that resulted in a 4 times increase in the capabilities in 1994. He went on 10 years later to say, but I know how we can change the DSL networks. And by reducing noise and a number of things, it was called vectoring. 7 or 8 years before it was possible to do, he came up with a system that would ultimately double the performance of the average DSL line.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say 7 or 8 years before it was possible, he was working from theory and said if we had powerful enough computers, we can arrange the whole network so that everybody's DSL goes faster. And he said, but we're not going to be able to do it for years until Moore's law brings down the price of computers.
Okay.
Okay. And it was quite everybody doubted it. He couldn't prove it except theoretical papers. But he thought he would be okay in 7 years. It actually took 10 or 12, but it delivered exactly as it thought. And he, among other things, was winding up his company, ASIA, controlled 100 million lines plus of broadband around the world at places like AT&T and Deutsche Telekom when it became possible and it works.
Mm-hmm.
Well, 5 years after that, he came with another idea about how he can improve Wi-Fi, and that would be a great business. And I happened to be on his advisory board, and I and almost everyone else close to him and working with him said, nothing wrong with your science, but the business is just not going to work out that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought to hold my tongue, talk a little bit about what I saw, but to hold the tongue because I knew that John had twice done very important things that everybody had said was going to be totally impossible. So even though it looked to me like his plan was going to be totally impossible, I said, John's done it
Had to
before.
give him a shot. And again,
and they do it again.
mm-hmm.
And
Well,
you see it.
as you say though, Dave, I mean, one thing is the science and making the technology work, and then the other flip side is the market forces and what the giant corporations are going to do. And if they decide, okay, we're not doing DSL anymore, we're going fiber, it doesn't matter how good the DSL works. The money's going the other way. Yeah.
And the thing that we've learned, and I've seen it again and again, is that when you're very successful, and we're talking about people like Mark Zuckerberg, who's made tens of billions of dollars, you're sure you're right about everything else,
Mm-hmm.
even when you're not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And among other things, he thought the metaverse was going to happen and be the biggest thing in the world 3 years ago. And Facebook has lost over $10 billion at this point.
Wow.
And the metaverse has been ho hum, and people have been running away from it.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
metaverse is going to be something useful. VR is going to be something useful. You're about to see incredible things in VR coming from Apple. But people who were darn sure 10 and 30 years ago that VR was going to change the world were wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, Apple has a new VR being virtual reality. They have a new headset, right, Dave, that they just came to market?
They have a new headset, and it's hard to talk about it on the radio effectively. And I haven't seen it myself, but people I really respect, like Mala, so that it is. In fact, we should talk about that for a few minutes because that's interesting, big news. Apple, according to people I trust who had it, has come up with an incredible VR system. who's a semi-professional photographer, says it's going to change everything in photography when people can see what you can do to live in a panorama put together from some of your photographs. It's sitting as a headset that has great features, including your ability to see what's going on in the outside world. It has a little camera in it that sees what's ahead of you, so your eyes may be blocked by the headset, but the camera is picking up what you would be seeing and can show it to you on the screen anytime you want to see it.
Wow.
And there's a pile of wonderful things that Apple has done there. Unfortunately, it's going to come out and it's going to ship next month for $3,500.
That's pretty pricey.
That's too much for most of us. And but Mark Zuckerberg 5 years ago decided that was all possible. He could deliver it. And as I say, lost $10 billion because the virtual reality from Facebook wasn't good enough, didn't deliver what he hoped. It could do some great things and great demos. We have a headset, and Jenny loves it sometimes. But he was sure that it was ready now. And in fact, when people built what he was dreaming of, Apple seems to have a whole lot of it. That was years later.
I guess we'll see if it takes hold, Dave, and like so much in technology, we could see that price come down dramatically if they're able to actually market that thing and get some traction in the marketplace. We remember when PCs cost $1,000 or $2,000.
$3,000.
Yeah.
A decent PC in 1980 cost $3,000. And I was making my living, among other things, because there was one unit called a K Pro that was $1,700 and did most of it. And people who couldn't afford $3,000 bought K Pros. And it wasn't very bad, but it had a really small 9-inch screen, for example.
And now, fast forward 30, 40 years. It's been quite a while, Dave, but Fast forward 10% of that cost, you can get a computer, maybe even
Less,
less.
less. But David Kay, who designed the K Pro, had great success. Suddenly was worth $100 million or so. And back in those days, that was a lot of money.
Hmm.
And I was one of his dealers, so I was seeing it from the inside.
Hmm.
He was one of the hottest companies out there. As I say, he personally was worth over $100 million. He decided he was an effing genius because he had made $100 million and this very successful thing. 3 years later, the entire company had collapsed.
Mm.
He thought the IBM PC had come out. He thought it wasn't going to matter to him. He was sure that he had something. The the IBM was not going to wipe him out. The IBM PC was a much better PC, and quickly they made versions of it that were less expensive, and the company went broke.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things. It's very hard when you're very successful not to think you're an effing genius.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Mark Zuckerberg is a very smart, capable businessman, but that doesn't mean he's going to be right about everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hard
Well,
to
Dave, we're
appreciate.
just about out of time here. Any final thoughts or tidbits you want to throw out there for our audience before we sign off?
First thing, you're going to be able to catch my co-host live on Zoom on February 13th. We'll have all the details for you, talking about what he's learned in 30 years of building community networks. Hopefully you'll join us for that. And we'll see you next week talking about how 2 or 3 million people are likely to lose their broadband as the federal money for broadband subsidies may run out in April.
Okay. There you have it. Well, thanks, Dave. This has been Dave Burstein and Stu Reid on WHCR 90.3 FM with Community and Technology every Wednesday, 5 p.m. Stay tuned. You just might learn something. Good night.